All right. Morning, my gents. Yeah. So NASA, the world woke up to the news that the first and long-serving president of Zimbabwe, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, has passed on, and this brought me to think, like, in the last 3-4 years, I've lost people that are very close to me. One just recently, maybe 2 or so months back, and when this news came, I started to think, what is my purpose? If I were to die tomorrow, today, like the next minute, when my life is looked upon, have I reached my purpose? So yeah, I'm going to just talk about that briefly, about finding purpose. So yeah, politics aside, I think the old man, to an extent, he reached where he found his purpose. I'll not go into deep politics as to the pain that hits us from his presence, but over and above all that, when we look at the greater good that he accomplished for the people, in my view, he lived his purpose, which was primarily two things: bring independence to the people, and then the second row was to give back the people what they had lost, which in my view is still rightfully theirs or ours. But anyway, that's not my talk. I was just passing through there. So yeah, finding purpose. So I think it's a question that boggles almost everyone. Why am I here? Why are you here? And I'm going to do two parts on this one. The one today, and basically I'll start with a bit of science, reproductive health, from what we know how a person is born. I think when you look at it, it simply states that when someone is conceived, there has to be a purpose for them. Because when you look at science says from the male seed that is planted, it comes in millions, okay? And out of those millions, one seed will make it to conception, right? So simply stated, out of millions, you were the one that came successful. And for what reason is a question that we need to address. And then also looking at the female side, right? So from the female side, the female, it's a very short period when someone is able to conceive, from what we learned from science, which is probably 3-4 days. Animal stronger systems 5 days. So we're talking of one from a couple of millions that had the chance to fertilize in about 3-4-5 days. And then the bigger question still then remains: for what purpose and for what reason? And yeah, so that's looking at it from a scientific perspective. You were not by chance, I was not here by chance, and so God expects something of me and of you. It's for you to discover what in your life, it's for me to discover what in my life. And I think when God judges, he looks at, have I reached what he brought me here for? Even Jeremiah in the Bible writes in chapter 1 verse 5, and he says, before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. Before you were conceived, I ordained you to be a prophet before the nations, or unto the nations. Simply saying, God expects you and I to do a particular purpose, to do a particular role to our fellow men. To others is to love, to others is to just smile, to others is to be a friend, to others is to be a motivator, to others is to lead, to others is to guide. But each and every one of us, we have a role, we have a purpose to fulfill. So yeah, I'll just speak briefly about how I believe I came to be. So this one is in two parts. The first part that I'll speak about today is about my great grandparents. Yeah, so how it all started, we originated from a place called Gutu in Zimbabwe, and back in those days, that's when people were more traditionalistic, and at that point they believed kuti for rain to come there had to be an appeasement of the spirits. And the tradition or the culture that was around our family was that the darkest child in one of the families. So if my grandfather had brothers, or he had cousins, so they would go from one household to the next, and in the household that was supposed to be next online, they would look at the darkest child in complexion, and that child would then be sacrificed. So when it came to my great grandfather's house, he was the darkest and was meant to be the next online. And yeah, so it so happened that a few days before the ordinance, his father picked in the night, and they snuck out and they relocated. Yeah, so that's how he survived, and from his line came ultimately my grandfather and my father. So when I look at this story, I start to ask myself, why did God allow for them to escape and not get caught? And ultimately, for me to be here today, there had to be a reason for my life. There has to be a reason for my siblings and my uncles, my aunties, my cousins, all of them. So now, the bottom line is, what is my purpose? And what is your purpose? And that is for us to find out. But as the Bible says, each one of us is supposed to speak out, to stand out for God, and to make a difference in our lives, in our times, and in the lives of others. So find your purpose, fulfill it. Have a nice one.